Okay, so I've continued modeling this. I've tapered the top a little bit by scaling in the edge loops up here. I've also used the cut tool and extruded some edges to create this configuration of openings. At the top where the band connects to this cup, there's a configuration of openings, and I've created this configuration using the multi-cut tool, extruding edges, and then just deleting the faces to create these openings. So now I'm going to create the curvature here at the top. If I show this image plane again, the top of the headphones curves backwards in this direction, so I'm going to create that by rotating these edge loops. But first I want to create this metal section here that sticks out a bit from the plastic area with the name of the model of the headphone on it. So I'm simply going to extrude a couple of these faces forward to create that raised metal area. It's just these two faces here. And this is an example where I'd want to move in the object axis rather than the world axis, because I want to pull these faces out in the direction that they're angled. It's just slightly raised, about like that. And then those edges are pulled in slightly. I'd want to move these edges inward based on the world axis orientation. And my move tool is already set to the world axis. Like that. So that looks good. I'll save this. Okay, and now I want to curl this area backwards. But in order to do that, I need a couple more divisions in this area here. So I'm going to use my connect feature again. And then I can just rotate these edge loops back to match the reference image. First I'm going to snap this vertex here. About like that. So I'll save this again. Okay, now's a good time to check for n-gons again. And I know I'm going to have a number of them here at the top where I created this configuration of openings. Select faces with more than 4 sides. Let's see if I have them anywhere else. Now it's just at the top here. It'll only take me a few minutes to use the multi-cut tool to resolve these n-gons so that they're either triangles or quads. But here I'm going to use the cleanup feature to fix them for me. And you can see that it simply added edges to resolve those n-gons as either triangles or quads. I'll save this as a new file. Now I want to create these plastic rectangles that go around the circumference of that first object that we created. You can see them here in this image. There are 14 of these little plastic rectangles that go around the circumference of that first object that we modeled. And that number is going to become important in a minute. So those little rectangles are essentially flush against the surface of this object, and then they extend out in a rectangular shape. So to create these, I'm going to slice along a plane, which is going to allow me to create straight edge loops or edge loops at a specific angle. And then I'll use a method for duplicating these rectangular shapes around this circumference at equidistant intervals. I don't want to lose any of the modeling work I've already done, so I'm going to create a duplicate of this object and then delete the areas that I don't need on that duplicate, so I don't lose any of the modeling work on the original object. So Control D to duplicate, and select the middle vertex here, convert to faces, and then just grow the selection until I encompass the area that contains these rectangular shapes. Hold down Shift and drag over to invert the selection, and then delete those. So I'm going to hide this temporarily. So in order to create this straight edge loop that lines up with the left side of this first rectangular shape, I could use the connect feature. So I could select my edges and use connect. But connect is going to create an edge loop that is the average of the angle between this edge loop and this edge loop. And that's not what I need. I need a perfectly straight edge loop. I could use multi-cut and try to draw as straight a line as I can, but again, it's not necessarily perfectly straight. If I scroll down here, you can see I have an option to slice along a plane. And what that will do is create a temporary plane that will allow me to determine exactly the edge loop that I want at a straight angle before I execute it. And since I want an edge loop that's going in this direction, I'll choose the slice plane that goes along the y-axis because that's going in that direction, and the x-axis, which is the axis I'm looking right at now. So I'll choose the xy, and you can see that this gray line has appeared, and that's the slice plane that I can move and rotate to create an edge loop in exactly the location and angle that I want. So I'll move this slice plane so that it lines up with the outer edge of this rectangle, and then click multi-cut when it's in the right location. So now I want to create the horizontal edge loop at the bottom of this rectangle. So this time I'll choose the slice plane that goes in the Z direction and the X direction, because Z is the axis in this direction, and again X is the axis I'm looking right at. So again, I'll move it into place. Once it's there, multi-cut to execute. I'll choose the same one again for the top. Multi-cut again to execute. So now I have these perfectly straight edge loops, the vertical one and then these two horizontal ones. So I literally just need the faces that line up where this rectangle is on the model. So I'll just select those, hold down Shift and drag over the others to invert the selection and delete that. So now I have just the faces of one half of one of these rectangles. So now I'm going to extrude these faces. And I can get rid of this edge loop here because it's not changing the shape of the model at all. And whenever you can remove an edge loop without affecting the shape of the model, particularly in game modeling, you should always do that. So I'll get rid of this edge loop. So now I'll start to move these vertices and edge loop to get the shape that I want. So I'll snap these to here. And then these snap to here. Now I can get rid of this edge loop and this edge loop. Snap these. And that's about what one half of one of these rectangular shapes looks like. So now I'm going to mirror this over to get the other side. I'm going to hide this image plane temporarily so you can see this more clearly. So two important points about mirroring objects, and these will hold true for when I mirror the entire cup over as well. When you mirror an object, it mirrors from its pivot point. So in order to mirror this object successfully from this side over here, I would need to make sure that its pivot point is set to one of these vertices along the middle. So I'll set the pivot point to the center. So I'm going to freeze the transformations on this object. And when you freeze transformations, what you're doing is you're telling the object that at its current position, angle, and or scale, you want that current position, angle, and or scale to be at zeros and ones. So 0 for translations, 0 for the rotations, and then 1 in each axis for the scale. So when I freeze the transformations on this object, you'll see that the appearance of the object, the location, the angle, the scale, won't change, but the numbers over here in the channel box for the translations and the rotations will go to 0, and for the scale will go to 1. So the scale of this object in each direction is 1 unit, and it's whatever units you've set your software to use. So if from this point in this direction is a scale of 1 in the z-axis, to mirror this object over to the other side, I would set the scale to -1. So if I set the scale of this object to -1, you'll see it flips over to the other side. So what I want to do to mirror this object is create a duplicate first, and then set its scale to -1 in that z scale. And I use the z because that's the direction along which I want to mirror it. But if I try to combine these objects and then merge their vertices, so I'll combine them first, and we'll see there are two vertices that are sitting on top of each other here, vertex 3 and vertex 6. If I try to merge these, you'll see it won't work. And the reason it won't work is because I didn't get rid of the faces along the center line before I combine these two objects together. So I'm going to undo this. So I'll just move this away to kind of explain what's going on here. So in order to merge this vertex and this vertex when they're sitting on top of each other in the combined polygon, the reason that they can't be merged is because merging them together would create what we call non-manifold geometry. And one example of non-manifold geometry is when an edge is shared by more than two faces. Any edge on your model can only be shared by two and only two faces. So if I were to try to combine and merge these together, this edge here, for example, would be shared by this face and this face, but also these faces along the interior, and I can't have that. So before I mirror this object, and I'll just delete the duplicate here, I need to get rid of the faces along the center. And now when I mirror this, so Control D again to duplicate, and then set the scale of the duplicate to -1 the z. Without those interior faces, I can now merge these vertices together. So I can combine them and then merge the vertices along the center. And since I know they're sitting right on top of each other, I don't need to worry about the threshold, so I can just merge. And now you'll see that these have been merged together. There's now only one vertex here, vertex 6. Same with each of these down the line. So it's important to understand that any edge on any polygonal model, no matter what the model is, no matter how high in resolution it is, any edge on the model can only be shared by two and only two faces. So since this object is flush along that first object, I don't need these faces along the inside either, so I'm going to get rid of those. Because again, I want to keep the resolution as low as I possibly can, so there's no reason to have those faces that are flush against that first object that we modeled. So I'll save this as a new scene. So I'll show the original object again. Let's look at this in X-ray for a second. So there are 14 of these plastic rectangles around the circumference of this object. And as you know, a circle is 360 degrees all the way around. So in order to determine how far apart each of these plastic rectangles is, I need to divide 14 into 360 or 7 into 180. Either one will give us the same number. So I'll bring up my calculator. I'll divide 180 by 7. I'll see I get this number 25.714, etc. So that's how many degrees apart each one of those plastic rectangles is along the circumference of that object. So I'm going to copy this number. So what I want to do is create duplicates of this object all the way around and have them be exactly 25.714, that number that I copied, away from each other along the circumference of this object. So I'm going to create 13 duplicates of this object, with each one being that number of degrees away from each other. But the first thing I need to do is set the pivot point for this object to the center of that circumference, so the center of this circle. So I'll set the pivot of this object to the center of this circle. And now I'm going to go to my Edit, Duplicate Special option box. And I'm going to tell it to create a copy of this object. I'm going to tell it to create 13 of those copies, and I'm going to paste that number from the calculator into the X rotation field, because you can see X is the axis around this circumference. Hit apply, and that's going to create 13 duplicates all the way around here that are exactly as far apart from each other as the rectangles on the actual headphone. You can see if I go to my front image now, they all line up with where those rectangles lie on the actual object. So I'm going to combine all of these together because there's no reason to have them as separate objects. I'll save my scene.